good evening and welcome. Glad you made it, whether you are stretched out in bed, melting into a couch, or hiding from housemates with questionable hygiene. Tonight, imagine you have got a big day ahead, that ancient special occasion, and your best option for getting clean is, well, let us just say, not exactly spa day material. If you are scrubbing up for some mysterious algorithm, go on, tap whatever button passes for approval these days. I would love to know, what time is it where you are, and where are you listening from? Sometimes it is wild to think of people everywhere, each easing into their own nighttime routines. So go ahead, get yourself comfortable. If you need a quick freshen up, enjoy your modern soap. That stuff is a miracle, honestly. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey together. So let us pretend it is the night before your grand event in Victorian England. A wedding, perhaps, or a church service, where a single raised eyebrow can haunt you for years. You would like to appear dazzling. Ideally, you would even smell less like a cellar, and more like someone who owns soap. But this is not the age of steamy power showers, or shop aisles glimmering with body wash options, promising to turn you into a tropical fruit. This is more complicated. Picture your dresser. No electric lights, just a lamp flickering, shadows dancing across a basin of water that is, let us say, enthusiastic about being tepid. The air is heavy with the scent of musty linens and faint sweat, both probably yours. You try to recall when the sheet on your bed last saw daylight. A while, honestly. Maybe dust has become part of your decor by now. You add water to your bowl, which is cleanish. For soap, you have something in a cracked dish. It is beige. It is lumpy. It smells faintly of mutton fat with a top note of metal shavings. You wedge it between your fingers, wondering if it is actually for cleaning, or just a block of kitchen leftovers that wandered up here years ago and stayed. Time to choose. Do you use as much as you dare, or do you conserve for winter? Decisions, decisions. Next comes the dreaded cloth. Not a soft, fluffy towel, but a rag that cracks if you fold it too confidently. It snags on your fingertips and leaves little threads behind, loyal to a fault. You dab it yourself, feeling about as refreshed as a potato after rain. There is a spot on your forehead that refuses to come clean, possibly historical, possibly permanent. Meanwhile, your mind sprints through every possible disaster. Tomorrow, will someone sniff and step away politely? Will Aunt Bess have another coughing fit in your direction? Or worse, will you catch sight of yourself in that warped piece of glass the Victorians apparently considered a mirror? You start calculating how best to avoid your own reflection, turning sideways, lighting a candle just right, accepting blotches as part of your look. The options for improvement are limited. You consider cologne. One bottle sits beside your comb. But honestly, it is less fragrance and more statement. Something like, behold, a person with access to spirits. Application means tipping the tiniest amount onto a handkerchief and patting your pulse points, then waiting to see if anyone faints. A safer route? Maybe try powdered chalk. You pick some up and dust it across your throat. Yes, now you are a little paler, but at least you resemble the living, if slightly flowery. If you are ambitious, there is always the chance to wash your hair. In theory, washing requires bravery, water that cannot quite decide if it is freezing or just indifferent, soap made for laundry, and the very real chance you will catch a chill and spend your big day sneezing politely into your cuffs. In moments like this, you might envy future people who wander into hot showers whenever they wish. aiming fancy nozzles at difficult patches. In their world, prepping for a big occasion is less a hope and a prayer, more a checklist involving sheet masks and 16 kinds of deodorant. They fret over the right moisturizer. You debate if cold water counts as self-harm. Still, as you stand there, you do your best. You scrub, you sniff, you readjust. For a moment, you are tempted to skip the whole ordeal and claim to have been caught up in some tragic embroidery accident. But no, you are determined to face tomorrow, scented, slightly raw, and hopefully inoffensive. Now we arrive at the grand spectacle Victorian bath night. Not an everyday affair, more of a household event. Think of it less as self-care, more as a logistical operation, like moving livestock, but with more soap and fewer hooves. First, the setup. Your family's washing tub is not something that lives in the bathroom, because there is no bathroom. You drag it out from a suspicious corner, the bottom cold, and maybe home to a family of spiders. Now the real adventure begins. Water hauling. Dozens of trips from the pump or the well. By the time the last bucket is poured in, the first has lost what little warmth it once had. If your family is feeling truly wild, the kettle on the kitchen stove might donate a teaspoon of heat to the mix. Chili cooks simmer with more care than this. The order is everything. Eldest to youngest, honored guest to afterthought. If you are the first in, you bask for a moment. Just you, tepid water, and your fleeting sense of privilege. For those waiting, suspense is genuine. Each passing minute means water that is cooler, grayer, and acquiring an interesting bouquet of family history. At last, your name is called. It is your turn. You run through your mental checklist. Do you actually want to be clean, or can you go on living with a light veneer of dignity? It is too late now. You step in. Your foot sinks through steam that has long departed, meeting a tide that is best described as complicated. It is slippery, faintly gritty, and still carrying secret souvenirs from all who bathed before. That bar of stubborn soap, now a thin ghost in the dish, is watching you. The act of bathing is both intimate and communal, everyone within earshot, someone inevitably opening the door for something vital. You never truly feel alone. Clothes hang from every available hook, the air thick with warmth, wetness, and the suspicious feeling that no surface has ever dried fully. You do your best. You dunk, you scrub, you wage a polite battle against questionable floaters. There is always one patch of arm or shin that stubbornly refuses water, resisting all attempts at a thorough wash. Sometimes, you wonder what 18th century science thought about scum lines, or if anyone ever actually got clean. You wrap things up in record time, keenly aware that the definition of fresh is flexible at best. Emerging from the tub, you blot yourself with a rough towel, recently used. But whose cycle is it at this point? The communal atmosphere is sticky. The air is dense, and you grab at your clothes, grateful to be fully dressed again. Your hair lies flat, not because of conditioner, but because humidity has achieved what Victorian engineering could not. You catch yourself imagining a future with taps that pour endless streams of hot water, with a room where you can lock the door and pretend, for 10 uninterrupted minutes, that you are the only person in the universe, a small, private miracle. Your modern self might skip showers or moan about water pressure, but here, you would trade an entire week of woolen socks for a minute under a real, hot shower. The bath is over. The ordeal lingers, a pleasant, if slightly clammy, afterglow. The scent of soap and something else clings gently. But you can claim victory. You and the generations before you are clean, if only for an evening, and if only compared to the furniture. Let us pause for a moment at your washstand, or maybe imagine you down at the shop, surveying a lineup of Victorian soaps, each one packaged to inspire either trust or mild panic. You hold up a bar. It is chalky, dense, and the label promises a dazzling transformation. Paler skin, fewer blemishes, the kind of honesty only Victorian marketing could conjure. You crack the wrapper to discover a scent that is part laundry, part hardware store, and part, well, something unclassified. Time for ingredients. Most bars contain caustic soda, which is not so much a moisturizer as a direct challenge to your fingerprints. Some throw in a sprinkle of lime for that gently sandblasted glow. If you are feeling adventurous, there is always the exotic bar boasting just a pinch of arsenic. That is right, a touch of poison for that convincing, translucent look. Why just wash away dirt when you could also wash away skin and perhaps a bit of dignity? A few steps over, another bar touts itself as carbolic. You are not sure if that means medicinal, dangerous, or both. The scent is sharp, lingering, less reminiscent of blossoms than of cleaning supplies in a very nervous hospital. Scrubbing with this bar, you wonder if you are becoming healthier or simply more flammable. Marketing does its best to convince you. Victorian advertisements promise gleaming, milky skin with only a few uses. Who could resist a soap insisting you will glow with vitality? Of course, in this context, glowing is not so much a metaphor as a potential side effect. If today's ads bragged about radiance brought to you by the wonders of industrial chemistry and a pinch of household poison, modern dermatologists might faint. Still, you lather and you hope. One bar promises to fight itchiness and leave you refreshed. Another is mixed with camphor or coal tar, because nothing says special occasion like scenting yourself with reminders of the local street lamp. If you do not break out in hives, you count it as a win. Is that tingling actually cleanliness, or is it something the scientists will not explain for another century? Every handful of suds is a gamble. You scrub, you rinse, and you wonder if your skin should squeak like this. If the product promises no more blotches, you only half hope it means freckles and not anything more sinister. In the back of your mind, you cannot help but think of the future, where allergy-tested soap selections line entire walls in air-conditioned supermarkets. The most dangerous thing about them may be a splash to the eye or a clashing scent name like cucumber melon. In the Victorian century, to clean was also to audition for a slot in the medical almanac. You marvel at the courage, or perhaps the optimistic denial displayed by anyone willing to rub arsenic onto their face in search of a passing compliment. For all the hazards, you almost want to tip your hat to their persistence, but mostly, you want to run your hands under warm water and enjoy the wild luxury of emerging with the same number of skin layers as you started. Maybe you glance at your silent, safe bottle of liquid soap on the bathroom sink. No warnings about accidental poisoning, no promise that you will achieve a perfect deathly pallor. Just gentle cleansing with oat extract. If only your Victorian self could imagine such a risk-free miracle. The old days had their charm, a little adventure in every so-called beauty routine, a bit of mystery with every wash. Today, you step into the shower, breathe in something labeled ocean breeze, and thank every lab technician who traded danger for dull, old cleanliness. Now, onto what might be the most treacherous part of your Victorian big day makeover: your hair. This is not a straightforward wash and go. You stare at yourself in the glass, running fingers over a scalp that is far more history than hygiene. The dream is glossy, styled locks. The reality is a toolkit better suited to pastry than beauty. Lard, pomade, a touch of chalk, and perhaps a little hitchhiker or two if it has been a good season for lice. Let us start with oil. In some households, lard is scooped out and worked through every strand. It is greasy, stubborn, and imparts a certain barnyard aroma, fragrant in ways that only an animal byproduct spread over a warm head can be. Your fringe refuses to obey, clumping in determined little bunches despite your best efforts with the family comb, whose missing teeth just add extra suspense. You twist, you press, you attempt a few ringlets, but mostly you just hope your hair will stay in place, or at least not attract anything buzzing. Maybe you have access to pomade. Victorian marketing likes to tell you it is sophisticated, possibly Parisian, certainly not just beef tallow with a whiff of lavender. It slides on heavy. By now, your scalp is more product than person. The scent battles your nostrils, flowery, fatty, a little medicinal. Your hands, too, now gleam. You wipe them on your dress or waistcoat, making patterns that no modern detergent will ever quite remove. If your goal is volume, you dust in a bit of chalk. This gives an immediate, powdery lift, and as a side benefit, turns your collar and pillows a tasteful pale gray. The texture is unmistakable, grainy, heavy, and somehow both oily and thirsty at once. When you itch, and you will, you must decide if it is product, nerves, or company on your scalp. Maybe all three. And then there are the interlopers. Lice are rarely acknowledged, but absolutely present. If you are unlucky, they are event guests who never RSVP and refuse to leave. Knit combs are a regular, if undignified, part of life, scraping their way through each night's dreams of being truly clean. No gentle lotions or 1-minute miracle treatments here, just manual labor, a prayer your neighbors are equally afflicted, and a wide range of hats. Hats are both shield and secret. They sit heavy, trapping heat and whatever has been living underneath. Elegance, sure, but with the subtext of please do not ask about the situation underneath. If you are lucky, the taller and more elaborate your hat, the less curious people will be about your actual hairline. Bad hair day? Hide it under a cavalcade of feathers and felt. If anyone suspects, well, so do they. You catch yourself longing for a world where hair care routine means pump bottles tagged with exotic plant names and conditioners promising silkiness, not just a heavier coat of grease. In modern life, a regular bad hair stretch is rarely this tactile. You envy the future with smooth combs, mild shampoos, and treatments that do not risk farm animal comparisons or head lice camaraderie. But here you are, ready for tomorrow, scalp tingling for half a dozen reasons, ears full of the muffled sound of your own hair settling under its oily armor. You glance at your hat, possibly the best part of Victorian fashion, and settle it securely. It is a finishing touch, a badge of both survival and denial. Underneath it all, you are a ventrity, just not, perhaps, in the way magazines would promise today. Now comes the part of getting dressed that no one likes to discuss. The underlayers. Not just one, but several, today's special. A parade of linen and cotton, all sternly reusable. You reach for your undergarments, folding them open and hoping for a small miracle. A patch that feels less lived in than the rest. There is a science to choosing which side feels least scratchy, which seam will not rub your skin raw by noon. You wish for softness, but settle for spots that are simply less aggressive. Slipping into these layers is an act of faith. The cloth is stiff, protesting every move. There is a faint smell of old sweat, soap that once was, and a ghost of last week's dance. The elastic is imaginary. The clasps are all business. It is a delicate game, layer after layer, each one holding in not just heat, but memories. You try not to think about who wore these before, or how many rotations ago they were last introduced to scalding water. As you lace, button, and wrestle, an anxiety simmers. What if someone notices? What if, despite your frantic attempts at personal hygiene, a certain scent escapes? There is a quiet tension beneath every polite conversation, an unspoken pact to ignore the realities under the velvet and brocade. Modesty is both a shield and a curtain. Every Victorian at the party is silently hoping to blend in, to pass the sniff test, to be quietly forgettable in more ways than one. You marvel for a moment at the astonishing confidence of modern life. Drawers full of options, machines that whir and whirl away every trace of last week's heat wave. The glory of changing underthings as often as you want. The humble victory of fabric that is fresh, springy, and blessedly anonymous. No need to calculate rotation schedules or haggle for extra rags. No simmering cauldrons in the kitchen. No endless scrubbing to bring back a ghost of clean. Still, something faintly heroic lingers in the routines of the past. You wriggle into your last layer, aware of every crease and every hopeful dash of starch. It is not glamorous, and certainly not comfortable, but you are now officially prepared to face society's gaze, inside and out. Yes, you may chafe, and yes, you may sweat, but at least you can console yourself with the knowledge that everyone else in the room has drawn the same short lot in the undergarment lottery. These days, you can almost forget how much a simple change of underwear matters until you spend a night in another century. And suddenly, the smallest comforts loom very large indeed. Now let us not forget your mouth, quite literally the centerpiece of charm, and tonight, a battleground of Victorian effort. Morning breath is timeless, but back here, the morning after taste is less peppermint, more reminder of the industrial age. You eye your dental instruments with the resignation of someone who knows far too much about soot. First, the brush. It is firm, maybe horsehair, maybe something more mysterious, and almost certainly secondhand. You twist it between your fingers, trying to ignore anything that might be pre-owned. The bristles are more suggestion than certainty, a few already pointing in wildly independent directions. Then, the cleaning powder, a magical blend of ashes, chalk dust, and if you are very lucky, a pinch of brick. Because what better for tooth enamel than a solid scrape with yesterday's fire? You dip, you dab, you brace yourself. The first pass in your mouth is gritty, tiny, stubborn flakes, latching onto gums and crevices. The taste is equal parts burnt toast, damp cellar, and the faint hope that you are at least outbreathing your neighbors. There is no froth, no mint, just the constancy of ash and a texture that could polish a candlestick. Scraping, brushing, and spitting all blend together in a nightly ritual of determination. You work methodically, partly cleaning, partly convincing yourself that effort counts for points. If any shine emerges, it is probably chalk. The aftertaste is less a flavor, more a lingering sense of ancient disappointment, and possibly a bit of resentment toward your own molars. Over it all hangs the knowledge that dental care in this era stops at the surface. Those lurking aches and mysterious twinges, best ignored, at least until someone invents painless dentistry a century later. You spit into the basin, rinse, and hope, mainly that nobody is planning a close conversation tomorrow or spontaneous folk song. And how about today? You might not leap out of bed eager to floss, but the victorious feeling of a minty swish and a soft bristled brush is something your Victorian self would call pure witchcraft. Toothpaste with options, sensitive, whitening, even bubblegum for the bold. Visits to the dentist mostly involve advice, not extractions under questionable circumstances. So as you wipe your mouth, minus the peppermint, chip away at that last crumb of grime, and stare at the brush with its loose bristle menace. You cannot help but envy the future. Morning breath is nobody's favorite, but at least it is not seasoned with last year's fireplace and a dash of plaster. In some eras, dental pride is just surviving until breakfast. Finally, you reach the final stage of Victorian pre-event preparation, the Great Scent Offensive. You stand at your washstand, inhaling the battle lines, bottles and jars promising to deliver you from disgrace, or at least to smother your natural state under something more ambitious. If only confidence came in a vial. You unstop a bottle. The scent roars out, undiluted, rose, violet, maybe a little citrus, but quickly betrayed by undertones of raw alcohol and something undeniably animal. Perfume is not a finishing touch. It is your primary defense. You dab behind your ears, under your arms, and, in moments of genuine despair, directly onto your clothes. The goal is less to smell good and more to outlast the competition. The result? A social ballroom becomes a battleground of clashing smells. Rosewater wrestles with lavender. Someone across the room has opted for musk, possibly imported by mistake from a livestock fair. Every inhale delivers a sensory surprise, sometimes pleasant, sometimes alarming, sometimes simply confusing. Beneath the top notes lingers the unmistakable blend of ammonia and old sweat. The perfume does not so much erase the day as raise the scent stakes for everyone nearby. Desperation drives you to try anything. Sachets tucked in corsets, lavender sewn into hats, pressed flowers in pockets, cologne splashed in places rarely discussed in polite company. At some point, the collected mixture drifts past floral and into the territory of chemical warfare, more of a plea than a promise, a subtle warning that the air is not to be trusted. In the crowd, a nervous glance is the universal code. We have all tried, and yet here we are. Every so often you marvel at the difference in modern life, where fragrances are subtle, deodorants unscented by design, and the greatest olfactory ambition is simply to smell of nothing at all. A world where, if you wish to attract attention, you can do it with just a whiff of sandalwood or vanilla, rather than single-handedly recreating an entire greenhouse disaster. Scent is power, but also profound exhaustion. You almost wish for the simplicity of no scent, just the clean, unremarkable aura of soap and fresh air. In a Victorian room, every nose is under siege, every lung desperately picking through bouquets for a place to hide. Even when you win, you are never quite sure what victory actually smells like. So you take one last look at the tiny bottle, now nearly empty, and brace yourself for the coming evening. If you cannot be the most pleasant, at least you can be the least alarming. It is not much, but it is something, a small comfort to carry into the crowd, hoping your chosen scent ages better than the rest. The glamorous parts of pre-event panic are safely behind you. Now, you enter the realm of tiny, necessary horrors, details nobody wishes to discuss, but everyone dreads being noticed for. The ear, the nails, the places polite society insists you keep pristine, even if the techniques for doing so are best left in the dark. You reach for a hairpin. Not strictly for hair tonight, not when the real emergency is a faint tickle inside your ear. There is no soft, flexible cotton bud waiting. No antiseptic wipe, just improvised courage and a steady hand. You try to extract whatever has built up, hoping to avoid the shame of being seen, up close, by a fussy aunt or the world's most judgmental vicar. You prod, you dig, you hope nobody barges in mid-excavation. Victorians may not have talked about earwax, but the threat always loomed. Next, your nails. You examine them in candlelight, the flicker revealing a week's hard labor across every ridged edge. Nail scissors exist, but not here, not tonight. So you scrape. You find that handy nail file, brick, if need be, or resort to the rough edge of a fireplace. The goal is simple: trim, smooth, and disguise any lingering evidence that your hands have touched anything living, growing, or remotely honest. Your knuckles are raw. The soap has left its mark, but so has life. You pick and prod, doing what you can with what you have. You cannot quite achieve the miracle of modern buffers and clippers, but you do try. A passing glance at the future brings hope. Compact cases with everything neatly slotted, gentle rotating tools for removing what should not grow. Creams and polishes designed to nurture rather than erode. Here, though, your best efforts leave your hands tingling and your ears resolutely average. It is not glamour, it is survival. These small moments, these tiny rituals, matter more than they should. Tomorrow's handshake or a quick turn of the head might draw someone's gaze. You fight back against the details, cringing at your own impatience, but relieved you have at least tried. In a world of handheld trimmers, soothing lotions, and squeaky clean ears you almost take for granted, it is easy to forget that once it took courage and a little ingenuity just to pass the sniff or scrutiny test. Tonight you have done your best. You are not polished, but at least reasonably presentable, right down to the smallest, most stubborn details. And here you are, at the final hurdle. You face your mirror, if it can be called that. Your reflection wavers in the dull glass, catching more anxiety than actual detail. You smooth your hair, sniff your sleeves, and try to forget which memories are just nerves and which are actual odors. Every inch of you is anxious, lightly itchy, and coated in the most optimistic mix of soap, chalk, and wishful thinking. You check for stubborn marks that are probably permanent, pat your hat so it sits just so, and do a last once-over. There is always a trace, yesterday's smudge hiding behind a fresh collar, a stubborn whiff of something earthy that refuses to be drowned out. You dare to wonder, will anyone notice, or are they, too, standing just out of the best light, praying their efforts look like confidence instead of surrender? Deep down, you suspect everyone in the room is just playing the same game. Faces set bravely, small hopes that their own secret discomforts will pass unnoticed. Maybe the real triumph is not perfection, but the shared relief of having muddled through. The entire event is less parade, more mutual truce. You draw a deep breath carefully, in case scented air triggers a fit of sneezing, and step out. Or you would, if you really had to. Best of all, you have the tremendous comfort of knowing that tonight, your only audience is history, and maybe the odd pet, no sharp-eyed aunt, no side-eye from distant cousins. No threat of someone catching you, mid-fidget, wishing you could scratch an unreachable itch. Right now, it is all just a story. You can laugh, stretch your toes, and thank every accidental inventor who gave you the modern joys of showers, toothpaste, and fresh socks. Victorian pre-event panic is best appreciated from a safe distance, preferably wrapped in a blanket, as far as possible from anyone else's bouquet of mid-century desperation. So as you drift toward sleep, you can tip your hat, metaphorically and itch-free, to the strange rituals of the past. The memory of lukewarm communal bathwater, homebrew arsenic soaps, an entire greenhouse of battling perfumes, and those sturdy, mysterious underlayers. Bath night now just means warm water and privacy. Your towels are soft, your toothpaste is merely minty, and the only battling aromas come from a candle you picked yourself. It takes just a moment to appreciate how every detail, your silent electric toothbrush, your reliable hot tap, and a rewardingly unscented pair of pajamas, marks a small but real victory over history. Your dignity remains intact, tucked safely under a duvet, with no surprise guests living in your hair and no lard on your pillow. Progress is not perfect. There will always be nerves before your own big events, the odd bad hair day, or the mild panic of a forgotten sock. But compared to scrubbing in hope, scenting in fear, and spending every social occasion quietly praying not to stand out for the wrong reasons, you have it easy. Tomorrow's plans, whatever they are, will feel lighter for the knowledge that nothing involves searching the house for a spare brick or the less scratchy side of a very old vest. For tonight, there is a kind of peace in that. You have earned it. Enjoy your sleep, your secret comforts, and all the odd little dignities that come from not being a Victorian guest at your own party. Morning settles gently over Aksum, its golden light unfurling across flat rooftops and the solemn heads of basalt stele. In the hush before the true heat arrives, the city stirs awake. Barefoot runners wind past merchants' unrolling carpets, their breath clouding in the mingled smoke of frankincense and breakfast fires. Everywhere, a whisper of anticipation moves atop the stone arteries of the market, where the scent of honeyed dough braids into the metallic tang of worked copper, an invisible tapestry of daily ambition and memory. Selim walks quietly at the hem of this delicate chaos, slender-shouldered and bright-eyed, his tunic as plain as river-washed clay. He is not a buyer nor a seller, nor yet a craftsman in his own name, still an apprentice, his hopes knotting themselves each dawn in the small of his chest. His sandals tap a rhythm toward the quarter where the old guilds cluster, their courtyards sequestered behind faded wooden gates. Here, craft carries the weight of memory, and memory is both shield and burden. The glassmaker's workshop is a sanctuary within the fervid market, a place separate, where the clamor of coin and barter recedes in reverence for subtler exchanges. Sand for fire, breath for form, the mortal for the nearly eternal. Selam slips through the cool shadow of the lintel, greeted by the faint sting of wood smoke and the crisp, crystalline laughter of the master's voice. It is here, amid the drifting dust and stacked amphorae, that his world narrows to essentials: a hearth, a rod, a molten bloom glowing like the captive sun. Master Jonas stands poised before the furnace mouth, the tendrils of his hair silvered by ashes and years. With a lightness that flouts his age, he rolls the gathered glass upon a marver, smoothing it with gentle certainty. Every movement is an inheritance. Gestures scribed in the memory of hands reaching back to the dawn of this city, when Rome's ships pressed the horizon and foreign tongues clambered up the jetted walls, bearing spices and secrets in brittle earthenware jars. Now the fires of Aksum burn quieter. The fervor of its empire recedes like the tide, but in this alcove, the old rites persist. Selam watches, learning not only the technical, but the ineffable: how to listen to the sigh of the flames, how to sense the precise moment when pliant glass stirs on the threshold between chaos and order. The air hums with expectation. In the master's hands, the glass shifts from formless promise to a vessel, both delicate and resilient. A water jug, perhaps, or a lamp whose purpose is both sacred and daily. Jonas blows softly, then more surely, his breath conjuring a sphere upon the waiting end of his pipe. And Selam feels, for a fleeting moment, as though the boundaries between flesh and fire and dream are less certain than yesterday. Outside, the velvet threat of change flickers, barely audible to the untrained ear. Traders with accents shaped by foreign shores haggle in the main square, their coin and curiosity dazzling but restless. They bring glass beads from Alexandria, blue as distant storms, and stories of new methods. Quicker, less laden with ritual, suited to markets impatient for innovation over tradition. Selam, listening disquietly, senses that their arrival is more than simple commerce. It is a tide against which an apprentice's heart strains helplessly, the possibility of erasure disguised as progress. In the twilight corners of the city, other workshops have already closed their doors. The guild, once strong in number, is now a dwindling constellation. Its masters aged, its apprentices scattered or seduced away. The craft itself, this slow negotiation with flame and patience, feels suddenly vulnerable, a whispered lineage at risk of being folded into silence. This knowledge hangs in the corners of Selam's mind as he returns to the bench, cradling newly formed glass still warm with the memory of fire. Yet for now, within these four walls, the rhythm holds, a dialogue between what has been and what wishes to remain. Jonas turns, laying his hand on Selam's shoulder, his eyes reflecting both pride and worry. Every vessel remembers its sand, he murmurs, voice low and ancient as the city itself. What we shape today carries more than water. Selam nods, the words lodging somewhere deep, where fear and wonder are inseparable. As he gazes into the shifting amber heart of the furnace, he cannot name the shape of what he is inheriting, only that it glows, fragile, luminous, and not yet lost. The city is a palimpsest, layer upon layer of conquest and kinship, the whorls of old traditions pressed faintly beneath the newer ink of ambition. In Aksum, stories are etched into stones, inscribed upon ivory, whispered through narrow alleys as the winds shift the dust, but never quite manage to settle it. Evenings here arrive not as sudden dusk, but as a patient fading, sun trailing its fingers across terraces where children chase the last fragments of color. Selam, done with his daily labors, follows his feet toward the quiet outskirts where voices thin and gardens press up against the ancient city walls. He moves through shadow and fruit-laden air, mind restless with half-learned lessons and the tremor of looming loss. The guild's halls, once echoing with laughter, the thump of tools, the music of intent, are now haunted by pauses, each bench marked by the absence of apprentices who will not return. Selam remembers, with an ache both personal and collective, the festivals of his childhood. Streets strung with glass amulets gleaming in the sun. Old masters recounting the secrets of color, the mysteries of the kilns, as though speaking spells to fortify the city's heart. Such nights had seemed endless then, the future an unbroken vessel. Now, tradition wavers at its edges. At the evening meal, his mother, voice careful, tells of a cousin lured away to Alexandria, promised ease and silver for abandoning the slow arts of their inheritance. His father studies the table's worn grain, sensing the wound beneath every word. Together, they hold appreciation and fear in equal measure. That what makes their world unique may prove too fragile for the hands of a changing tomorrow. Selam's own yearning is complex, a desire both to master and preserve, but also to understand the new shapes casting their shadows across the old city. At night, he dreams of vessels spun from starlight, of hands older than history cupping fire to carry it onward. Waking, he touches the cooled glass by his bedside, the work of his own trembling efforts, feeling the ridge where vision faltered, and yet still, the object persists. He gathers hope from imperfections, the way a river gathers depth from cradled stones. Master Jonas knows the weight of memory as well as any. By torchlight, he sits with Selam in the near silence of the workshop, stories kindled as carefully as flames. He recalls battles fought with patience, when pigment ran too thin, or the wind threatened to rob the kiln of its breath, or some foreign agent tried, with promises of wealth, to buy up the secrets the guild had held in trust. These reminiscences are not boastful, but measured, hinting always at the responsibilities woven into every act of shaping glass. A vessel, he says, carries more than what it will hold. It echoes the hands that shaped it and the world that needed it. There are records, dusty and half forgotten, sealed in wooden chests waiting beneath the floorboards. Selam pores over them on moon-bright nights, scrolls of recipes, notes on mineral tints, and the peculiar temperature when sand and soda surrender to the will of flame. Manuscripts in Giez recount old guild disputes, agreements with neighboring goldsmiths, inventories of colored beads commissioned by distant queens. Selam learns history not as a litany of dates, but as a living braid, one strand twisted always around his own trembling anticipation. Thus, each attempt at the pipe, each negotiation with a truculent batch of sand, is a dialogue across centuries, fraught, imperfect, vital. Foreignness presses more keenly now. At the market, Selam watches a stranger from Sidon unpack blue vials, their curves unfamiliar and brilliant in ways his own work struggles to replicate. The crowd is tempted. Such things speak of elsewhere, of novelty's spell. Some mutter that nothing at home can shine like this. Others, older, press their lips thin and look away. Even the city walls seem to lean inward with uncertainty, weathered by seasons of encroaching change. Selam's heart grows heavy, shoulders tense, as he returns home each evening, afraid a time will come when his hands are filled only with memories, unable to craft anything that truly endures. And yet, when dawn returns, gentle and slow, he finds himself drawn again to the workshop. Thread by thread, the rituals of preparation steady him. The weighing of sand and natron, the steadying pulse of the bellows, the first hesitant shimmer of raw glass in the crucible. Old and new flicker together, never quite blending, never fully parting. In the grain of his master's voice, in the warmth of each unfinished goblet, Selim perceives both loss and longing, a history not buried, but asking again and again to be carried forward, shaped anew under different, ever-questioning hands. Winter in Aksum does not descend rowdily, but seeps into the crevices, with a quiet pervasiveness that is felt first in the bones, then in the disposition of its people. By morning, the air tastes more brittle, thin threads of mist hang between half-empty arches, and the clatter of hooves rings sharper in the echoing streets. Beneath the sullen gray sky, the city is a living memory, stitched together from stone, dust, and centuries of longing. What was once the hub of power, where trumpets blared for emperors and processions wound beneath cloaks of lion skin, is now a tapestry quietly fraying at the edges, regal threads worn by a world shifting its gaze elsewhere. It is in such a season that Selim's days have grown more arduous. The workshop's flame, now fussier with damp fuel, requires coaxing and vigilance. The glass, always a sensitive listener of its context, responds unpredictably, sometimes fracturing, sometimes refusing to take a shape, announcing with silent stubbornness that the old ways cannot simply be repeated without question. Selim feels himself tested, not just in skill, but in faith. The empire whose name alone used to still the market now finds its authority questioned by porters and priests alike, their voices sharp with anxiety and pride. In the marketplace and near the docks, the talk now leans toward distant places. Roman traders are fewer, but their coin still glimmers in local shrines, reminders of alliances and betrayals braided through the long, intricate narrative of Aksum's rise. At the wells, stories crawl of Byzantine envoys hawking silk in exchange for ivory, of the Himyarite kings to the east, whose messengers arrive with gifts hammered from unknown metals, their customs unfamiliar, their speculations a quiet threat. The empire's reach, once felt with certainty, is growing spectral, retreating to the realm of reminiscence. Selim, in the hush of the workshop, absorbs fragments of these transformations. He listens as Yona's murmurs about the old court commissions, goblets for feasts that once filled the night with laughter, lamps made for temples whose gods have grown dim. Even an empire's shadow can linger longer than its crown. Yona's reflects one twilight, rubbing the aches from his weary hands. The apprentice, watching the glass cool into shapes more angular than before, wonders if this is what memory always does. Hardens, becomes unfamiliar, until only strangers can see it as precious. There are times now, under clouded afternoons, when foreign offers press more boldly. Envoys in silk robes, bearing names pronounced with difficulty, bring gifts that are, in their way, both tribute and temptation. Mirrors so perfect they unsettle the face, beads faceted with cruel precision. There are murmurs among the guild elders. Should new techniques be learned, or at least borrowed? Should one abandon the cumbersome rituals, the insistence on purity of material and method, to ensure survival in a remade world? Selim finds himself restless, caught between curiosity and loyalty. He watches skilled hands from Hind and Egypt, guest artisans, hired to instruct or perhaps to replace. Their tools gleam with variegated metals. Their laughter is brisk, assured, lacking the hush that has grown ceremonial among Aksumite glassmakers. The guest glass is brilliant, coldly dazzling, but it strikes Selim as lacking gravity, unconcerned with whether it will be remembered once broken or lost. It feels like water running across the surface of stone, vivid, but unable to leave a mark. Even so, in the late hours, Selim is drawn to the docks, the places where languages cross and bargains are written in the night's quiet code. He learns to read the maps of new arrivals, bundles of unfamiliar fuel, powders of rare earth, small parcels inked with the seals of cities whose worldviews do not nest within his own. From every transaction comes a subtle question: which fragments of self should be preserved, even if it means courting irrelevance, which must be risked, in hopes that some as yet unimagined vessel will carry forward more than nostalgia. He dreams often these nights of the city brightly lit, the guild thriving once more. But when he wakes, it is to the reality of a world caught in suspension. Mastering the old craft not only as invocation, but as a wager that what is made in fidelity to memory can still have a future. The empire, for all its vanishing boundaries, leaves traces in every gesture, every vessel raised from flame. And Selim, the last and youngest apprentice, feels with aching clarity that he does not stand at the end of a lineage, but at the dark cusp of its most dangerous beginning. Spring stirs uneasily in Aksum. Rains descend in cautious intervals, pooling in the market's uneven flagstones, drawing soft chlorophyll perfumes from the city's hidden gardens. The streets, once somber, now hum with the restlessness of revival. Blossoms surge against deserted courtyards. Vines reclaim walls too long forgotten. Yet within the workshop, the season's renewal feels uncertain, overshadowed by the persistent question of what is worth saving in a world that shifts more quickly than memory can reconcile. Selim finds his pulse attuned not only to the measured rituals of his craft, but to the persistent beat of resistance echoing through the city's smallest moments. News circulates of another artisan, this one a weaver, her fingers calloused by tradition, who refused the cheaper dyes of foreign traders. A goldsmith bruised with age returns a shipment of Roman coins, choosing to barter for salt and misser bread instead. Across Aksum, such gestures are modest, quiet refusals, almost invisible, threaded through the larger pattern of trade and accommodation. Within the glassmaker's modest realm, Selim and Jonas shape their own reply. The tools and materials, always precious, now seem fraught with symbolism. Selim learns not just how to recognize the finest grain of sand or estimate the right balance of natron, but to weigh every choice as a declaration. Aksumite glass, he realizes, is not simply the sum of its raw components, but the result of patience, memory, and adoption. Each vessel an intimate record of decision and hope against the urgings to modernize. Jonas persists with old prayers, murmured softly at every ignition of the furnace. To outsiders, these petitions might seem superstitious or redundant, but for Selim, their resonance grows clearer. Every incantation is an act of sustaining, holding at bay the erosion of intention. The elder refuses the imported fuel, though it is said to burn hotter and longer, preferring spindly local acacias, whose flames require attentive tending. Their fire knows our hands, Jonas says, voice creased with conviction. At night, by the wavering light of a single oil lamp, Selam begins experiments of his own. Guided by inherited recipes and whispers of intuition, he tests the combination of pigments drawn from the ochre earth at the city's periphery, the silt of riverbanks, and dried petals sacrificed from his mother's garden. The glass that emerges is uneven, streaked with color, sometimes an unrepeatable coral, sometimes a deep, milky jade. Occasionally, under the scrutiny of day, these vessels seem unremarkable beside the flawless imports, but in private, Selam recognizes a singular radiance. Textures that echo this land's soil after rain, hues that catch the evening sun with an honesty the outsider's wares cannot feign. There is joy mixed with sorrow in these experiments. At times, his failures sting more sharply, for they are wholly his unforgettable proof of risk taken, refusal made. Jonas watches carefully, stepping in with a correcting hand when disaster hovers near. But more often he nods, satisfied with Selam's willingness to test the boundaries of tradition, adapting not by erasing the old, but by making room for it to endure in unfamiliar forms. Meanwhile, tension in the market simmers. Some accuse the guild of pride, even of clinging to irrelevance. Others, quietly, almost in secret, approach Selam's stall and run calloused fingers along the rim of a flask, weighing something wordless and essential in its rough finish. Our mother had a lamp like this, a woman tells him, smile flickering with distant memories. When it burned, we believed no evil entered. Resistance, Selam understands, does not always roar. It is shaped in persistent gestures, the refusal to dilute one's labor, the courage to mark each work with a fingerprint that cannot be copied by any mechanism of empire. Glass, in his hands, becomes witness, a material as unyielding as it is fragile, as open to reinvention as to shattering. He finds power in this paradox, in the space between defiance and acceptance, and begins to see himself not as the relic of a fading guild, but as the earliest author of a story no foreign gloss can overwrite. Outside, the empire's shadow lengthens and flickers, but within the workshop's glowing heart, Selam crafts his own prophecy. The fire consumes, transforms, and preserves, but it is the hand that remembers, and it is the hand that endures. Summer draws itself out across Aksum in a trance of warmth, the air vibrating with cicada song and scented plumes of myrrh that rise from courtyards damp with early morning watering. Along the high terraces, poppies droop as the days lengthen, and sunlight moves with the certainty of ritual across the bone-pale stone of ancestral tombs. The city, though touched by tensions and uncertainties, carries on, its moods shifting like the sky, unpredictable in their arrangement, yet constant in their return. Selam wakes each morning to a quieter world within the workshop. The apprentices' benches remain empty, and the corridors echo with the memory of footfalls that will not return. Jonas sits more often in the soft pool of shade near the furnace, his eyes turned inward, hands working slower as though holding a secret conversation with the past. There are days now when he lets Selam tend the fire and shape the molten glass alone, a test not only of craft, but of stewardship and faith. The city, too, is learning to preserve its own soul amid the drift of change. In the market squares, sharp-eyed children barter for handfuls of salt and wedges of green melon, their shouts ricocheting against the solemnity of elders recounting stories beneath banyan trees. Foreign traders pass, their wares shimmer bright, but so too do the keeper of songs, the weavers, the brewers, all sheltering customs from the slow corrosion of forgetfulness. Selam observes and absorbs, his work maturing with the rhythm of observation, each day less desperate to prove, more willing to simply witness and serve. One slow afternoon, a consignment from Alexandria, a trunk of delicate sea-green vials, sits untouched in the back storeroom, its finery admired but unmet by longing. Yona's gestures for Selam to prepare instead a set of humble flasks, the kind local families fill with rainwater after stormy nights. In these, Selam pours not only molten sand, but a tapestry of memory, hope, and the faint but persistent edge of defiance. Each piece carries the scent of the land, river-tinged blues, tawny speckles of dust, and a lucent glow that catches the last of the sun before dusk settles the world into hush. Aksum's people respond almost imperceptibly. Some come merely to look. Others return, bringing fragments, a broken lamp, a shard found in soil that they cradle like relics from vanished ancestors. Slowly, Selam's vessels merge into daily life. A cup brims with sour tej at a wedding. A jar gathers starlight on a rooftop altar. These are not trophies to the city's glory, but quiet accompaniments to its endurance, their value measured not in novelty, but in the hush of belonging. In the evenings, wind gusts through the city, scattering seeds and raising the dust in slow spirals. Selam sits outside the workshop, hands stained with the pigment of the day's efforts, gazing toward the hills where shepherds' fires begin to appear among the acacia. He feels the subtle comfort in continuity, a sense that even as foreign powers trade and impose, even as the breadth of empire dims, some filaments of meaning endure. Carried by the things shaped, the words kept, the rituals observed, Yonas, his voice softened by age and resignation, calls Selam over to share quiet counsel. "We do not make artifacts for the ages, Selam," he murmurs, eyes glinting with the reflection of the fading light. "We craft for the morning and the evening, for hunger, for blessing, for remembrance. What lasts is not always what endures in stone, but what persists in the hands of those who live quietly and well." The master's words settle around Selam like a blessing and a burden. Each jar, each cup, becomes both a farewell and a welcome, a vessel through which he passes the intimate light of his own memory and longing. He recognizes, finally, that resistance is not a roar but a slow, patient kindling, kept alive by the countless, overlooked acts that draw the past gently into the present. When midsummer's festival arrives, and lanterns, some glass, some clay, line the winding roads, Selam's work glimmers among them, indistinguishable from the ancient and the new. The children chase their flickering lights, laughter scattering into darkness, and for a moment, the city's lineage is unbroken, neither surrendered nor frozen, but alive in the smallest gestures of celebration. In the afterglow, Selam breathes deeply, the memory of the flame still fluttering in his heart, and bows his head in quiet thanks, grateful to be, in this fragile interval between loss and renewal, the last glassmaker of Aksum's dawn. A slender thread of smoke drifted upwards, vanishing into the vast lattice of beams above the imperial workshop. At sunrise, the silence in Chang'an's corridors was ancient and delicate, broken only by the distant purr of birds roused from their perch, here at the edge of the palace proper, where servants barely dared glance and ministers walked briskly past to more visible glories. The air shimmered with heat and the secret labor of craft. Li Wei, not yet 16, stood with bare feet upon the hammered earth, toes firm against its patient coolness, his back straight from both anticipation and a fear whose dull ache he could not shake. The fire had to be beckoned gradually. His master always insisted, like luring a wary spirit. The furnace waited, squat and round, belching the misplaced hunger that came from the last days of empire, an orphaned vigilance, the memory of mastery stretched thin as a reed mat. Li Wei's hands, surprisingly steady, closed around the long iron blowpipe. His reflection in the cracked bronze shield above the coals looked boyish to him, smaller than he wished, yet older too, for loss already haunted the lines of his eyes. Once, they said, 100 artisans toiled here. Now, less than a dozen men, their faces lined with the sorrow of dismissal and disappointment, moved in and out of the firelight. Masters and apprentices alike had been sent away. To the provinces, the minister said. But it was an exodus that meant disappearance, anonymity, skill unrecorded. Li Wei's own parents, potters of provincial renown, had pressed a well-worn string of cash into his palm when he left home, their eyes veiled with both hope and resignation. Hereditary skills were fading like myths at the edge of dream. The imperial household remained, for appearances, a world of ritual and precious things. But the patterns of extravagance were thinning, visible only in the soft luster of decaying murals or the idle game of an empress' discarded fan. It was the age of concessions, of ambitions concealed under silk sleeves, of pearls repurposed from neglected diadems. Yet within these shadows, the flame at the workshop's heart still promised the possibility of beauty. Li Wei felt this hope, persistent as a trapped breeze, as he paired himself to the rhythm of Master Shen's voice. The man was brittle, but his words rang through the smoke. The work is not in strength, but in timing. The glass does not bow to the quick or the careless. He watched as Shen gathered a drop of molten glass shimmering at the end of the pipe, its radiance swelling in the half-light like a captured star. Li Wei's own first efforts produced awkward bubbles, swollen shapes with the scars of inexperience. Still, Shen watched with an unblinking patience, the same patience the world granted to stones, again and slower. He learned to inhale at the right moment, to twist the iron softly as the glowing bead swelled, to listen for the faint whisper that marked the difference between a vessel's life and collapse. In these hours, the world outside melted away. The imperial court might be fragmenting, senators plotting, eunuchs whispering in tapestry's folds, generals in far provinces weighing the worth of loyalty. But inside the workshop, the cosmos contracted to breath, flame, and form. Through the slatted window, perfumed breezes from imperial gardens occasionally drifted in, laden with magnolia and cedar, reminders that beauty can arise at the ragged end of grandeur. Sometimes they heard laughter from some distant wing, or the careful tread of palace guards whose duties were more ceremonial than vigilant. Li Wei wondered at his own presence here, one more orphan of fortune, swept in on the tide of dynastic entropy. That night, beneath the pale glow of lanterns and the conversation of crickets, Li Wei lingered at the far end of the furnace as the others drifted away. He cradled a failed goblet, the glass thin yet pocked, glimmering with potential spoiled by haste. In the farthest corner, where broken molds and forgotten tools gathered dust, his eye caught the edge of a scroll, tucked behind a pile of cracked crucibles. It was brittle, the silk pitted with age, its paint faded but still discernible beneath a patina of centuries. Carefully, he unrolled it. Crimson diagrams unfurled, the anatomy of a vessel unknown to him, curved not as common hand glass, but with shapes that hinted of foreign lands, perhaps the legacy of traders who followed the Silk Road's bright, unending line. Lines of calligraphy danced along the margin, a script older than the dialect of his master, perhaps a dialect from the hand's peak. Li Wei's breath caught. Among formulas and secrets, one line stood out, ciphered in metaphor: the breath that endures outlasts the flame. Though its meaning was veiled, something in it rang as true as a bell in solitude. In that instant, the workshop ceased to be merely a place of dwindling craft. It became a vessel of secrets, an ark of lost beauty and disappeared promises. Across the city, where the emperor's decrees were evaporating faster than ink upon palace scrolls, Li Wei felt the fragment of something greater pressing at his hands, the whisper of a forgotten method, the hope that even in ending times, the art might not die completely. As he stood, scroll pressed to his heart, he was watched only by the flicker of lantern flame upon cooling glass. The night, heavy and poised, the last glassblower of the Han, though not yet aware of his fate, had taken his first step beyond obedience, into the uncertain territory where memory, fire, and longing ignite what remains of a vanishing world. The afternoons in Chang'an became heavier as the season unfurled, weighed down by a sky that seemed uncertain, its haze the color of wetted ash. Rumors traveled on these winds, encampments of the Xingnu prowling the northern marches, border governors sending silk-wrapped pleas to a thinning court, officials vanishing into exile, or the soft oubliette of disgrace. Within the workshop, these murmurs crackled faintly, unsettling as the distant thunder of horsemen. Yet Li Wei, having discovered the ancient scroll, moved now with a shift in his bearing, still apprentice, yet burning with the silent wonder of forbidden knowledge. He read the scroll for hours at a time, heart illuminated by its puzzles. Each dusk, when the others dozed beneath their cloaks or bartered gossip in huddled clusters near the cold kiln, Li Wei sought solitude beneath eaves shaded by bamboo. There, coiled among the diagrams, he hunted patterns, unfamiliar alloys, ratios of gallnut ash, diagrams of blowpipes curved like the horns of wild sheep. The technique, it seemed, was not fully Han, its forms radiating the subtle influences of the strangers who once arrived from the north and west. The Xingnu, those enigmatic adversaries now lodged as both enemy and memory. At court, the Empress's mirror was rumored cracked, her reflection marred, her fortune uncertain. Shadows stretched in the palace, elongating anxieties, so too among the artisans. Every morning, Shen would scan the faces of his dwindling fellowship, as if already listing those soon to depart. News came that Master Zhang was summoned to a distant post, a polite exile for a craftsman deemed superfluous by the court's new budget. Li Wei's own trembling at this culling resolved into resolve. He pressed hands into cooled loam, recited the formulas scrawled upon the scroll, and dreamed of glass neither Han nor foreign, yet transcending both. One night, when a wind pressed the workshop's shadows into elongated grotesques, Shen placed a hand upon Li Wei's shoulder. "You read too much beyond your task," he murmured, low enough that smoke itself might covet the secret. "Some things are left forgotten for a reason." Li Wei, startled, turned his gaze to the old master's eyes, warped by years of furnace glare, yet showing a flicker of familiar longing. Shen did not elaborate. Instead, he tamped sand gently over a newly cast bowl and limped away, his footsteps mingling with the hush that greeted every new imperial decree, a hush of resignation, rarely hope. But Li Wei could not turn away. The scroll became his clandestine companion, cradled against his ribs. Bit by bit, he reconstructed one of its vessels, a narrow-necked flask designed for long travel, faceted not for mere beauty, but to please the hand that grasped it in motion. He gathered oxides and strange-smelling resins, bartered from spice sellers threading through the city. Each experiment produced misshapen ghosts, glass clouded or cracked, spouts collapsed, colors run wild. Some nights he wept, faint with exhaustion, then rose again to blend ashes with new patience. Fire spoke to him, each tongue of flame uttering the dialect of uncertainty. There was a grace in the way the molten glass swelled, shimmered, then drooped if his breath was not measured, not simply a test of skill, but of humility. Invisible wafts from the city carried reminders of violence, drunken soldiers quarreling, foreign voices raised at the city's edge. Glass, too, was a precarious thing, always on the verge of shattering, persistence, and fragility interwoven. As objects gradually took truer form, Li Wei noticed marks on the scroll's diagrams that resembled neither Han nor Xingnu script. One afternoon, a Mongolian horse trader stopped to rest outside the workshop compound. He bore a swaggering confidence, a wolf-tooth pendant thumping against his breast as he traded idle words with the gatekeeper. Emboldened, Li Wei approached, the scroll fragment hidden beneath his robe, and asked after the symbols. The man's eyes squinted, measuring this youth whose tongue stuttered with both fear and awe. "Old marks," the trader replied, fingering the parchment with caution. "Not mine, nor my father's, perhaps from those who ran before the Xingnu lorded the steppe. Secrets, better left under earth, some say." He shrugged, yet did not return the scroll immediately. For a slow moment, Li Wei felt the weight of all that vanished, peoples, skills, even the names of things, heavy upon him. When the parchment was pressed back into his hands, the trader offered only a single phrase, half counsel, half warning. "All we make is borrowed from old ghosts." In the night's small hours, Li Wei returned to the furnace. He recalled the outlines of lost encounters, warriors and merchants whose paths crossed briefly with his ancestors, the slow entangling of feuds and friendships that wove Han, Xingnu, and countless others into the tapestry of empire. A bottle cooled at his side, clear, flawed but promising, its lip tinged with a shimmer that recalled the steppe's faintest dawn. He wondered if the Xingnu children ever drank from such vessels, filled not with wine, but sour mare's milk, carried for weeks under an open sky. He crouched among the embers, scroll unfurled, listening as the drums of distant unrest reverberated across city stone. There, in the flicker cast by his labor, Li Wei could almost sense their approach, the shadowy riders of history galloping toward Chang'an's tired gates. Above him, the stars wheeled in ancient silence. These were indifferent to dynasties, or so tradition taught, Yet for Li Wei, hunched above his fragile invention, the pattern of their light seemed charged with both warning and invitation. Against all collapse, his task was unchanged: to unlock the vessel whose memory lingered, whose form might travel yet again to the horizon, carrying with it some distilled, translucent splinter of lost time. The city around him, braced for uncertainty, grain stockpiles inventoried, while courtiers shuffled old alliances. The imperial workshop, that nominal center of authority, became a minor theater for endurance and innovation. A place where one boy labored at the edge of extinction, fire and hope commingling in the glass that cooled slowly, reflecting sidelong shadows, those of conquerors, ghosts, and the quietly undiminished resolve of the last apprentice. The rains arrived on the city like a steady drumbeat, washing the dust from palace roofs, soaking the red clay, and softening the carved lintels of ancestral homes. Li Wei came each morning through puddles that mirrored the battered spires of Chang'an, their reflections wavering and reforming, as if reminding him that identity, too, was a fragile construction. Forever shifting between sky and earth, the workshop's air was humid, redolent of damp straw and the char of cooled embers. Sleeves plastered to their skin, the dwindling cohort of artisans worked in silence, the usual banter stilled by the rumors that now arrived with every courier. The treasury's reserves bled dry, jewels auctioned by discreet eunuchs, petitions for grain coming not just from farmers, but from generals. In the sharp scent of desperation, Li Wei found a strange clarity. Whatever hovered at the court's horizon, be it invasion or implosion, would brook no waiting. He resolved to attempt the full realization of the lost vessel. Step by patient step, he rehearsed the scroll's cryptic guidance, coaxing glass from fire with a new steadiness. Where before he had sought to master the material, now he listened for its reply, adjusting his rhythm until molten glass yielded to his touch, first to form, then to intention. He borrowed alloy fragments from remnants left by past masters, scavenged slivers of a deep green pigment rumored to have come on a caravan's last leg from Fergana. Heart pounding, he traced not imitation, but invention, no longer bound by hand tradition, nor entirely subject to the scroll's foreign intricacies, but laboring at the mercy of his own insight. Even as the empire around him ricocheted between dread and denial, the fire within the workshop sharpened. Li Wei's fellow laborers, skeptical at first, became quiet witnesses to his persistence. On a morning when the sky seemed to hang heavy and yellow with the threat of storm, even Shen paused his measured stride to observe. The old master asked nothing aloud, yet the tilt of his head, the slow uncrossing of his arms, bespoke an interest mingled with regret. A recognition, perhaps, that the hour for lost ambitions was returning, if only in miniature through the vessel in Li Wei's hands. Night after night, Li Wei refined the process, fusing tradition and the artifacts of long-drifted peoples. He learned to modulate his breath so that the final shape arose not from brute assertion, but from a careful alliance with unpredictability. The glass, thin to near transparency, bore the faintest whorl within its walls, a spiral echo of the scroll's hidden geometry. The act itself became subversive, to create beauty when survival was the only currency left, to reassert the possibility of something enduring amidst the dry calculus of collapse. He worked into exhaustion, hands raw, nails blackened by ash. A single mishap would cleave the vessel, and each time it did, a new lesson appeared in the cracks. A slightly altered temperature, the angle of the pipe, or even the placement of his own doubt. At times, Li Wei felt as if he were conversing not only with the material, but with the ancestral ghosts of the workshop, those who had invented, lost, and concealed these methods before him. Their presence hovered, neither threat nor comfort, as he measured the cycles of heating and annealing, measuring the breadth of his world against the dwindling pulse of empire outside. Word of his progress sifted quietly through the scorched corridors of artisanship. One morning, a palace scribe, his copper-bound tally sheet stacked high, drifted in on the pretense of inventory. He lingered, eyes moving not over records, but over the vessel on Li Wei's bench. When Li Wei bowed, the scribe's face barely flickered. "There is talk," he said, "that you attempt what even the court once abandoned. Is it wisdom to labor for what cannot be ordered?" Li Wei studied the scribe's robes, stitched with care but thinning at cuff and hem. The silken ink, threads pale with wear. "To yield is death," Li Wei answered, surprising himself with the clarity of his own voice. "To try is life, even if the answer is lost." For a moment, the scribe's detachment blurred, and something like pride warmed the air between them. No further words passed. The scribe left, but Li Wei felt the exchange settle within him, small as a seed. It was not only the court that caught the echo. Among his peers, now more brothers of adversity than rivals, Li Wei's determination infected the routine. Others set aside caution, attempting refinements of their own, adding flecks of gold leaf or rare white sand to their formulae. Failure remained frequent. So too did moments of laughter, brief blooms of camaraderie amid privation. In these, Li Wei found solace, the workshop, for a shivering while, steadied by the bond of effort. When, at last, he drew from the furnace a vessel that withstood the cooling, he was alone before dawn. Its stillness, a deep pause before the city's anxious gears began again to grind. Pale, thin, and slightly twisted, a nuance the scroll suggested was no defect, but a signature of the method. The flask sat cupped in his palm, catching the early blue of morning, as if it distilled all the cold clarity of the northern steppes. He looked upon it as one might study a letter from the dead. Not merely a tool, nor even a treasure, but a sign. Beauty returning under threat, proof that defiance against endings could itself become a legacy. He set the flask upon the windowsill where Shen, rising, might see it first, its surface, against the faded silks of empire, shimmering faintly with a promise that neither conquest nor neglect would wholly erase. In the uncertain hush that followed, Li Wei closed his eyes, pulse steady, as if listening to the shape of resistance cooling within the glass, a silent vow sealed in artistry, defying all that dusk and downfall might intend. By late summer, Chang'an supplied its boundaries with little more than bravado and receding memory. The city, once a latticework of ambition, now felt hollowed, its great avenues echoing with processions less stately than desperate. The banners of the hand draped heavy as morning veils from balconies eager to forget. In the furnace's glow, Li Wei labored on, the ritual of craft now both sanctuary and silent resistance. Gone were half his comrades, swept away like script scoured from stone, drafted for forced repairs on city walls, scattered as conscripts, called to return home before total collapse. The workshop's emptiness grew as a forest denuded by drought. Those who remained carried silence like armor, avoiding even the comfort of shared lament. Shen's health faltered. Deep coughs shuddered through his frame. Yet he refused to yield the post of overseer, watching Li Wei with an unreadable intensity that alternated between pride and sorrow. The vessel that had survived, the flask of defiance, became an object of quiet reverence. Visitors to the workshop, when rarely they came, paused before it as before a relic, its cool surface holding the memory of mornings when hope could be wagered on skill alone. Shen, at first reticent, began to guide Li Wei anew, coaxing out of semi-retirement the last stories and techniques still lodged in his feeble hands. Their exchanges became rituals themselves, silent, efficient, yet weighted with the knowledge that each demonstration might be the last given from master to apprentice. Outside, the rhythm of Chang'an was broken by new alarms. One dawn, the distant clangor of gongs told not for imperial ceremony, but for fire. A blaze sweeping the northeast granaries, evidence of sabotage or mere neglect, none could say. Ash drifted over neighborhoods, settling like winter upon the alleys and roofs. It was in this new twilight, when morning and soot alike stained the air, that Li Wei found his resolve deepen. He worked with an urgency that was neither frantic nor reckless, but propelled by the conviction that their art, however doomed, must give towards a dawn after darkness. Shen, between coughs, shared secrets once reserved for the most advanced initiates. The tempering of glass with precise cooling in wet iron molds, the harvesting of rare sands from tributaries now guarded by bandits, the preparation of vegetal dyes, coaxed from roots and leaves at the edge of the city's dying gardens. For Li Wei, each lesson became an enactment of gratitude. He documented everything, setting charcoal to parchment as twilight fell outside, committing not only method, but also the logic behind each step. Why a mixture was layered a certain way. Why to wait so many heartbeats after a vessel came aglow. The act felt less like transcription than the slow building of a testament. A codex not just of skill, but of presence, marking the fact that, though forgotten, they had existed, and for a moment surpassed the imperatives of collapse. But the cost of continuity was visible. Fewer supplies arrived each week. Wood was rationed, forcing a greater economy of fire. The artisans resorted to burning twisted roots, and when nothing else would answer old records, their golden brushwork reduced to the same gray dust as the rest. At first, Li Wei recoiled from feeding knowledge to the flames, but as Shen observed, the living flame is the price to keep another light burning. Nothing is saved forever. News trickled in. A peace envoy murdered outside the northern gate, a magistrate's betrayal, coinage replaced by salt. The city turned on itself, doors barring at dusk, suspicion replacing custom as the city's rhythm. Still, the workshop's light glowed nightly, an incongruously gentle defiance amid the hardening world. It was at the nadir of this scarcity that Li Wei dared his boldest invention, wishing not only to echo his inheritance, but to redeem the spirit hinted at by the ancient scroll. He devised a lamp, a vessel neither bowl nor bottle, but an orb of delicate filigree, pierced with channels meant to fracture and multiply light. Every attempt was a gamble. More often than not, the glass collapsed into ruin, or the channels sealed into opacity. But when one evening the experiment at last survived, Shen, watching from the shadows, offered the barest nod, a gesture both benediction and farewell. In the dark that followed, Li Wei placed a rare sliver of oil-soaked hemp into the heart of this lamp and lit it. Across the sanded benches and shuttered windows, light scattered not as a single beam, but as constellated fragments, dancing in deliberate disorder, recalling a sky devoid of threat or border. The effect entranced even the most battered among the remaining artisans, persuading for a moment the ordinary walls to seem holy, and the long vigil of craft to gleam with fresh possibility. The sight moved even Shen, whose eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, softened as the patterns settled across his brow. Words came halting. Beauty has no emperor. It endures where it is made. For Li Wei, the lamp was not only achievement, but promise, that as long as form could be given to what might otherwise vanish, something of their world could pass beyond the conflagration, suspended in light, awaiting recognition by hands and hearts, yet unseen. Outside, the palace's banners smoldered in misery, and the cries of the city rose in the humid night. But in that sealed chamber of makers, where ruins might otherwise have claimed the last testament, the craft remained, a subtle fire illuminating the hush, the ash, and the silent resolve of those who, by making, defied forgetting. In the waning glow of a sun that forever seemed to hover on the edge of a saffron horizon, the Mughal court pulsed softly at the center of an empire grown fragile. Each day balanced upon the trembling axis of memory and loss. Pigeons beat their wings against the minarets, pale stone, and the breeze carried drifting fragments of incense, faint reminders of countless vanished feasts, and the whispered ambitions of princes now interred beneath the earth's cool shroud. Within these labyrinthine marble halls, beneath domed ceilings painted with scenes of paradise, bordering on dream, dwelled Farah, an apprentice whose fingers bore the delicate scars of silk and dye, whose path wove quietly between the spectral magnificence of her world and the silent ache of irrevocable change. By birth, Farah belonged to the weavers' fraternity, a lineage stretching back through time's sooty corridors, binding her to the warp and weft of the Mughal story as indelibly as any thread sewn into the emperor's robe. It was near dawn when she entered the workshop, the air alive with the fugitive patter of rain upon latticed screens. There, the rhythmic shush of spinning wheels irrigated every chamber, as if the fragile legacy of the Timurid throne could be spun anew each morning from raw cocoon and discipline. Dyes floated in ceramic jars, pomegranate rind, crushed indigo. The hushed brilliance of saffron steeped until the room was tinted gold. The master weaver presided over the looms as a priest over a sanctum, eyes vigilant for every flaw that threatened to mar their secret code. Every pattern, a paisley whorl, a gossamer bird, a flowering vine, told a story more tenacious than any written chronicle, coded in the language of color and looped silk. Yet even within these sanctified workshops, the world beyond pressed in, a tide of foreign tongues murmuring in the palace corridors, offering curious trinkets and coins weighed against scarlet bolts. English and Dutch factors, their eyes pale and hungry, trailed behind their interpreters with ledgers clenched under their arms. Farah observed their brisk, unhurried steps, the hard glint of their gaze, felt the faint shiver that ran through even the master's hands as he met their offers with guarded, courtly refusal. Already, rumors flickered about. Lesser nobles bedding foreign cloth beneath their rich brocades, courtesans draping themselves in cheaper patterns smuggled upriver. Farah watched her own mother, her spine bent, her hands agile as minnows, teaching the youngest girls to coax stories from the moist, yielding silk. Sometimes, Farah would brush her fingertips over a half-finished scarf and feel the breath of an ancient epic, a slant of distant laughter or sorrow pressed flat between the threads. She wondered, if the empire unspooled, would the memory encoded here vanish as well? Outside, the roar of commerce hummed. Elephants lumbered past the palace gates laden with porcelain and pearls, while riverboats tethered at the waters edged disgorged crates stamped with foreign crests. Once her ancestors' craft had sheltered under the patronage of rulers who prized the subtle dialogue of silk and light. Now, an uneasy hush hovered whenever news of trade concessions or charters crept into the workshops. The threat was less a hammer than a shadow draining confidence from the air, loosening the unspoken trust that had bound weaver and emperor for generations. Against this backdrop, the emperor, haggard, yet rasping with the faded grandeur of his forebears, presided over a court where every day began with a recitation of legacy and a reckoning with loss. His silhouette, garlanded in muted brocades, moved slowly among his courtiers, pausing sometimes to finger the embroidery or linger at a tapestry that recalled a younger, more certain reign. At such moments, Farah felt herself not only a servant of her craft, but an inheritor of an ache too vast to name. For she saw, with a child's painful clarity, just how the empire's seams had begun to unfasten, stitch by cherished stitch. Yet beneath resignation, there simmered something stubborn, a light almost painful in its conviction. She studied the twisting tendrils of newly dyed silk, fingers trembling, heart kindled by the stories that moved inside each skein, silent but steadfast. The continuity of the weaver's guild, that delicate, invisible net, felt to her both precious and perilous. Each dawn, as she bent over another loom, Farah vowed to press her own longing into the fabric, to tether herself to all that might otherwise be sundered by the advancing tide. Thus opened the day in the House of Weavers, a threshold where decline met resilience, and where the last, fragile epics of an empire whispered themselves into being, one patient thread at a time. When dusk spilled against the jolly windows, scattering fractured light upon the looms, Farah moved as though tracing the edge of a secret, a silent communion with those who had come before her. The lamps threw their frail circles over silk laid out like river water, and side by side, apprentice and master summoned another day's work from colors both subtle and defiant. This was a twilight hour, beloved for its ambiguity, neither wholly one day nor the next, a liminal pause in which grief and purpose were plaited indissolubly together. In this suspended hush, the workshop swelled with the subtle harmonies of the trade, the slap of comb against thread, the susurration of spun silk looped over nimble fingers, a soft exchange of murmured advice between old hands and those new to the guild. Yet beneath this calm order, conversations diverged from pattern and pigment, sometimes in uncertain whispers, to the tremors running beneath the city's marble bones. Even the younger girls sensed unrest in the markets, tales of foreign coin exchanged for native secrets, of trade posts swelling along the riverbanks like wounds that wouldn't close. Farah came to realize, through these half-heard lamentations, that each woven panel bore greater weight in this twilight world. The threat was a slow strangle, not dramatic, but insidious, a dull ache deepening in the guild's foundations. There were small betrayals, preferred dyes now priced beyond reach, trusted suppliers who vanished into the labyrinth of new regulations, rumors of taxes imposed by unseen hands. With every clandestine conversation, Farah's commitment grew taut, stretched until the smallest act of creation became an act of resistance. The weavers themselves, her family in trade if not in blood, carried the resilience of reeds that bend but refuse to break. There were elder men whose fingers had stiffened with toil, yet whose eyes had known emperors in all their peacock splendor. Women whose laughter, though rare, was sharp and unsentimental. They traded advice about knots interwoven with warnings about spies among the traders. Their pride was understated, but steadfast as the silk they conjured from sorrow. No loom would ever run cold while a sister watched. No motif would be diluted to please a stranger's whim. On occasion, Farah accompanied her master out into the tangled arteries of Shahjahanabad, traversing a winding path through the bazaars as the city bristled with intertwined temptations. Spices and betel and rosewater perfumed the air, but more urgent now were the voices speaking Portuguese, Dutch, English, voices that pressed for samples, for secrets, for exclusive rights. Farah watched as her master parried their cheerful aggression with a soft-spoken dignity honed by a lifetime. Every refusal was a thread twisted anew into the fabric of tradition. Every careful bargain a way to guard the soul of their art. In the shadowed backstreets, fellowship among artisans endured, a clandestine camaraderie expressed with a nod or the exchange of a rare, favored dye. These moments reminded Farah that her world was yet suspended between what had been and what might still be salvaged. Each interaction, each glance, each secret sign added another subtle stitch to the invisible tapestry of shared defiance. The city's pulse thudded through her, unbearable in its uncertainty, yet alive with the hope that had animated emperors and beggars alike. Returning to the workshop, Farah found herself drawn closer to the oldest members of the guild, their hands marbled with fatigue, their recollections dense as brocade. She learned not only the hidden techniques for achieving peacock green or gold, veiled with ghostly blue, but also the cautionary stories encoded in every motif, the arrangement of leaves to conceal a poem, the restless birds that symbolized ancestral exile or longing's price. There were tales of forebears who had survived famine and fire, who had once barricaded themselves within the palace walls to shield the looms as conquerors ransacked the rest. Some nights, as Farah traced her thumb along the lines of a half-woven stole, she weighed the paradox at the heart of her world, how fragility could clutch at endurance in the dark, how protest could grow luminous beneath the cover of repetition. She believed the silk's soft gleam was itself a kind of revolt, a determination not simply to endure, but to transmute sorrow into pattern. In every motif unspoiled, in every stubborn preservation of ancestral recipe, she felt herself bound to something vaster than the waning empire, something that might yet outlast its patron's reign. In the very act of slow making, the weavers rehearsed their quiet refusal. As the lamps dwindled and the city beyond exhaled into sleep, Farah understood what resilience required, not the clamor of the bazaar, not the pronouncement of the throne, but the constancy of a hand drawing silk through the shuttle despite the world's unraveling. Through patience, precision, and memory, the weavers stitched themselves into the city's shadowed future. Thus did the night settle in the house of weavers, not as silence, but as an unwritten vow. As the first heat curled above the rooftops, Shah Jahanabad awoke beneath a sky raw with unfulfilled monsoon. Streets rustled with the commerce of promise and anxiety. Farah found herself surrounded, on all sides, by the quiet dread of displacement, a sense that history pressed ever more insistently against the fragile tapestry of her days. The looms became battlegrounds of patience, their frames humming taut with challenge, each spool's resistance mirroring the brittle spirit of the guild. The emperor's gaze grew ever more distant, his energies wafting outward along the colonnades, as if his memory floated between this world and another, whose music had grown faint. Once, his presence alone was enough to anchor the weavers, a living testament to old contracts and the inviolable prestige of their art. Now, orders arrived with irregular frequency, the palace's couriers nervously clutching slips of commission, more hesitant than regal. There were whispered asides of the emperor's declining faculties, of ministers whose affections drifted toward foreign goods and clandestine alliances. Within the workshop's walls, uncertainty vibrated like an untuned string. Threads caught, fibers snapped, and the air bristled with words left unsaid, resentment at lower wages, suspicion directed at new faces in the guild, and questions about whether their craft could outlast the shifting favors of the court. The old ways of apprenticeship, once an unbroken chain of trust, now found themselves challenged. Some among the younger artisans eyed the opportunities offered by foreign factors, enticed by quick coin and the promise of silk that shimmered but held neither story nor soul. For Farah, this era of suspicion struck with quiet brutality. She watched two brothers bicker in hushed voices, disagreement over the purity of dyes threatening to fracture a partnership forged in childhood. A favored loom lay idle, its usual caretaker missing since the previous moon, rumored to have joined a merchant outgoing to ports not marked on any ancestral map. The master's brow creased daily into new furrows, not of age, but of resolve in the face of slow surrender to outside pressure. One day, a delegation of foreign traders arrived, requested a tour. Their coats gleamed with unfamiliar cut, their words clipped by impatience. They praised the silk's delicacy while proposing new patterns, unnervingly symmetrical, harsher in line, and suggested, with perfumed confidence, that the future belonged to those who adapted. Farah listened, heart stony, as they traded compliments edged with threats, marveling at the artisan's skills while challenging whether these same hands could serve markets an ocean away. Their presence settled like moths, beautiful but lethal to the cloth. That evening, shadows stretched long across the dye vats as discussion rippled through the guild. Some elders argued for tradition's sanctity. Let the emperor's silks remain untarnished, each motif an invocation of legacy. Others, wearied by uncertainty, posited compromise, the necessity of survival dressed in hesitant pragmatism. Farah turned the argument within herself, feeling the tension between preservation and adaptation twist through her wrist as she worked. Would stewardship require purity or change? Was resistance, at its heart, a refusal, or could it evolve, sheltering the craft by consenting to foreign tastes only at its margin? Amid these deliberations, the city outside swelled with unrest. Processions winding through the night, protests against new taxes imposed by administrators whose names rang harsh and foreign. At the gates, soldiers from the distant provinces eyed the streets with a vigilance born of uncertain orders. The merchants' square grew boisterous, deals struck beneath gasps of rumor. A beloved dye-master had been arrested for smuggling. A consignment of precious mulberry threads intercepted and claimed for the company's interests. Tension reverberated far beyond the looms. Even in moments of stillness, Farah's hands trembled with the weight she carried. Each evening brought new reckonings, a missed knot, an imperfection imperceptible to any eye but her own. In her solitary walks atop the flat roofs, she gazed eastward, watching the small fires of other craftsmen flicker, alive, then vanish. She wondered, in the tapestry of her own making, would the silk yet hold, or would the stress unravel the picture entire? But there came also flashes of solidarity, shared laughter in the face of adversity, stories whispered as instruction, communal meals that claimed this hour as their own. The master, recognizing her unease, spoke softly one night. "A loom will bow under tension, child, but in the right hands it sings." Farah pondered the wisdom, uncertain yet comforted by the presence of those bound, not merely by work, but by the stubborn filaments of hope. With dawn, she returned anew to her station. If loss was inevitable, the beauty that endured, however imperiled, would not be hers alone to cherish or to defend. A tender hush descended over the weaving quarters as the monsoon's first true rains traced runnels across the whitewashed walls. Farah leaned into the sound, letting each droplet become a small meditation, a moment's space between memory and necessity. Water narrowed into rivulets outside the workshop, carving pale veins in the clay. With every passing hour, the world seemed both enclosed by the storm and liberated from prying eyes, a rare sanctuary for those who must guard their secrets. While the city's greater affairs thundered beyond the courtyards, something intricate began to unfold within the workshop's heart. A quiet plot spun from loyal hands and whispered resolve. The elders, having measured the stakes in endless nighttime circles, urged the artisans to preserve not only the patterns beloved of emperors, but also those designs forbidden or near forgotten, ones sculpted from the histories too perilous for public display. Farah was entrusted with a fragmentary sketch, the cannon's spindle of crimson and silver lilies, vining over midnight blue, a motif ancient as exile and threaded through with warnings. For the first time, she did not simply copy or embellish. She bore the responsibility of a secret script. So began the weaving of the hidden tapestry, charged not merely with beauty, but with fragile defiance. Each artisan received encoded instructions. A petal curved to recall a massacre survived, a sequence of knots denoting loyalty to a vanished sovereign, a color sequence reserved for mourning and hope. In this tapestry, their collective story would be embedded, its true meaning legible only to those bound by oath and memory. The master designed, the guild conspired, and the young apprentices, including Farah, executed the details with breathless care. They worked by night, shifting their schedules under cover of rain. The lamps were trimmed low. Conversation fell to a minimum, tension hanging in the air like the storm outside. To an outsider, their new commission appeared unremarkable. An exquisite panel for the emperor's private chambers, a returning motif of lilies resting beside the celestial paisleys and winding cypress. But within its weave, unlikely combinations of shade and form served as veiled testament. One corner held the silhouette of a broken dome, stitched in a nearly invisible ink, an allusion to temples raised in the north. Elsewhere, the suggestion of river water curled alongside flames, invoking both plenty and the threat always lingering at the empire's boundaries. Farah's own task was to conceal the faintest motif of all, a single sparrow, wings outstretched but head turned watchfully, hidden among the curling arabesques. To her, this delicate, easily overlooked bird became more than symbol. It was the embodiment of vigilant love, of a survival too quiet for proclamation. Each night, cramped beneath the eaves to finish her section, she felt herself pressed against the invisible limits of her courage. The work demanded not bravado, but meticulous devotion, the acceptance that meaning could pass unseen, safeguarded by discipline and patience. Outside the sanctuary of the looms, the old rhythm of the city showed fissures. News of riots along the river reached them in muted echoes. There were reports of a noble's estate seized by the company for debts, and tales of entire artisan families forced to dissolve their workshops, their hands turned overnight from silk to labor less storied. Some within the guild debated flight, whether it was wiser to conceal their gifts in new towns, to vanish into villages where the colonial officers did not yet scrutinize every market. The master, however, urged for one final stand. "All walls are porous," he murmured, "but the heart's memory is not so easily breached." In the closeness bred by these clandestine nights, Farah came to know her companions in unexpected ways. Shabnam, usually wry and brisk, revealed a poetry in her turn of phrase when explaining a difficult pattern. Malik, who seldom spoke at all, demonstrated an uncanny precision with the trickiest knots, his silence a shield for private pains. In the flickering half-light, the boundaries between master and apprentice blurred, every pair of hands participating in the act of remembrance. As the tapestry's invisible language grew ever more intricate, Farah saw its power accumulate, not as a banner waved in open rebellion, but as a subtle net cast through the generations. The knowledge that each motif might seed a question, kindle a stray recognition, gave her restless hope. Their tapestry was not merely art for its own sake. It was a vessel, carrying forward a legacy no decree could truly erase. In the damp hush before dawn, Farah lay her hands on the completed section, feeling its textures yield an oath composed of silence. She wondered if, in some far-off future, a stranger would recognize the code, if the weight of their story, concealed but unbroken, would find new hands to bear it onwards. For now, the tapestry remained hidden in plain sight, a testament to the endurance of the unseen, and to the innumerable lives braided, wordless, through its warp and weft. By the time the storm waned, the city's shadows had grown slender and long, poured from the gardens through streets that bore the exhaustion of both hope and reluctance. Shahjahanabad, ever restless, now wore a hush particular to places on the verge of surrender or renewal. Farah moved through these softened avenues, each enclosing her in scents of damp earth and spent jasmine, a reminder that the monsoon's generosity had come at the cost of fragile certainties. The workshop's air kept the smell of rain, lingering above the hush of looms that now wove not just for the emperor, but for the memory of all things threatened and beloved. The secret tapestry, complete and unobtrusive among more opulent works, soon passed into imperial hands. Court officials praised its finesse, remarking on the revival of motifs not seen for generations, unaware that beneath those reassuring whorls, another current moved, the preservation of a world on the edge of invisibility. Yet life within the guild did not return to untouched rhythm. The elders bore new lines on their faces. Apprentices revealed fatigue in the cautious way hands hovered above the fine silk, as if fearing to mar the last vestiges of heritage. News arrived from outside. Neighboring looms consigned to ruin, entire families pressed into service laying tracks for the company's metal roads, their skills rendered redundant by the ticking certainty of progress. Farah, apprenticed to tradition, now found herself cast also as recorder, her mind busy cataloging what might not survive. Her nights spent sketching, without rest, the recurring faces and the familiar forms before they slipped into oblivion. Each small act, writing a pattern sequence, naming a shade so it could be remembered, felt as urgent as breath. One afternoon, Farah's mother took her aside, passing down a battered notebook, its cover worn smooth by generations. Within its pages lay carefully scribed diagrams and poems, notes on metric, records of failed attempts, and triumphant discoveries. Some entries marked births, others referenced political upheavals or shortages that had forced creative substitutions. A margin held a children's game of riddles devised during long shifts. In this bundle, she saw the living root of her art, not only inherited skill, but a sprawling inheritance of mistakes, laughter, resilience. When you feel lost, her mother murmured, look to these pages. The hand that writes remembers what the mouth dare not. As the city staggered forward, its palaces borrowed for foreign councils, its bazaars echoing with unfamiliar demands, Farah's task grew lonelier, yet more essential. She taught the youngest weavers, fingers steady as she demonstrated the old ways, her voice cautious but clear. She refused to let the language of their discipline collapse into silence. Each named knot, each rhythmical movement, stood against the pull of forgetting. With each class, she noticed new signatures in the patterns, an apprentice quietly inventing an inflection, a gesture that would, perhaps, become necessary legend years hence. The act of teaching itself became a slender defiance, extending the line forward through uncertainty. In intervals of rare calm, she brought out her sketches and notes, copying recipes for dye into new pages, illustrating the geometry of sacred patterns with patient reverence. She imagined a time in which these blueprints, tucked away in a basket, folded within a garment, forgotten and rediscovered, might reawaken the dormant tradition. In her dreams, the threads unwound and rewove themselves, often in shapes unfamiliar, yet unmistakably kin. Some nights, she was haunted by silence, by the absence of the shuttle's music in neighboring compounds, by the knowledge that her craft now perched at the crumbling edge of an empire's memory. Yet even in these moments, she believed that what they wove was larger than fear, handed down not out of obedience, but out of love and the deep instinct for beauty. When the tapestry was finally revealed during a private audience, drawn with ceremony before the emperor and his remaining loyalists, Farah kept to the back. The praise for the panel's intricacy, for its subtlety, brought the faintest nod from the aging sovereign. Yet his fingers, when they traced the lilies and furtive motifs, hesitated just a moment too long on the pattern's coded corner. For a fragile instant, Farah wondered if in the emperor's dimming eyes there flickered the recognition of a bond beyond silk, a sorrow for all that could not be spoken or preserved. In the weeks that followed, as the imperial commission receded into legend, signs of transition crept in. Some senior guild members left for farther provinces or vanished into new trades. Others, like Farah, remained, shouldering the task of both survival and memory. She came to a simple understanding. The weaver's legacy would not be measured solely in brocaded robes displayed on royal occasions, nor in the lineages inscribed on brittle paper. Instead, it survived wherever craft met care, with every hand that learned, with every voice that whispered the story behind a motif, with every stitch undertaken despite uncertainty. On the eve of another monsoon, Farah watched over the now quiet workshop. Spools at rest, dye vats emptier, yet shelves lined with scrolls and patterns, the faint echo of her mother's laughter lingering. She touched the battered notebook, felt the tapestry's hidden codes alive beneath her palm. Somewhere, beyond domes and rivers, other weavers might yet wait, unknown but not alone, to reclaim what the present could not see. So the story of the last silk weaver slipped forward in time, unremarked in annals, but vivid within the threads. An inheritance left not as monument, but as a promise that the patterns shaped by memory and longing would one day find daylight again, spun fresh beneath kinder skies.